Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the Answer Company. The division championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Sheridan Dulas & Kins, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009, Sheridan Dulas & Kins are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. Pleasure to broadcast our show today from our new home at Egan High School. And it's a real pleasure to welcome to our studio a new guest on our show, Jake Loesch, who is the Executive Director of the Citizens League. Jake, welcome to Access to Democracy.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be with you. I appreciate it.
So, since you're a first-time guest on our show, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm a Minnesotan through and through. I was born and raised in the North Metro of the Twin Cities. I graduated from the University of Minnesota Duluth in 2009 with a political science degree. And then kind of started working in politics right away. Out of college, my first job was with the Republican Party of Minnesota. I worked on some of the statewide campaigns, and then as a legislative assistant to a freshman state senator in 2011. After that, I actually served as communications director on the Minnesotans United campaign, which was the Vote No campaign on the marriage amendment. Went on to work as a lobbyist in public relations, and most recently as the communications and engagement director at the Department of Transportation, MnDOT, before starting with the Citizens League.
What types of issues did you deal with at MnDOT?
Oh my gosh, you can't imagine. I mean, there's so many things that I think a lot of people don't realize MnDOT is involved in. A lot of my job, of course, was explaining the projects and things that the agency's working on. And I got the fun job of running the Name a Snowplow contest. For anyone who's familiar with that, we started that in the winter of 2020, which was just a really fun thing to see through, and love the creativity and engagement that Minnesotans brought to it.
That was in the news this past season,
yeah,
the Name a Snowplow contest. It's amazing how creative Minnesotans can be when it comes to naming a snowplow.
Oh my goodness. The first winter we did it, we had no idea what to expect. And we left it really open-ended. We let people submit all the names they wanted to. And we ended up with more than 24,000 name submissions that first year of doing it. So it took us a while to dig through all those ideas.
Did you have a particular favorite that you came across?
Oh my, I did love some of the ones that were particularly Minnesotan. So, you know, we're the only state in the country that says duck, duck, gray duck versus duck, duck, goose. Duck, duck, orange truck was one that they named a truck up in Duluth. So, I mean, it was a blast to go through them, and really people came up with them. We never would have been able to come up with all those creative ideas ourselves. So it was so much fun to see.
Very good. Let's turn to more recent history that you've been involved in. You've been the executive director of the Citizens League since
September of last year, so about 6 months now.
So just still fairly new to the job. So tell us a little bit about the Citizens League for our viewers who may not be familiar with your organization. I understand it is a nonprofit. When was it founded and why was it founded?
Yeah, thanks. The Citizens League was actually founded in 1952, so we've been around for 72 years in the state of Minnesota, and it was founded by a group of concerned citizens, primarily in the Twin Cities, who wanted to find a way that they could empower others to be involved and have an active role in policymaking. I think over the years, the way we do the work has changed, but that general mission is still very much the same. How can we, as an organization, enable people from all backgrounds, all ideologies, geographies, wherever they may be in the state, empower folks to be active in policy making and find those opportunities to influence policy outcomes. So, we create the best state to live and work for as many people as possible.
So it seems like a real foundational premise of the Citizens League is that we get good public policy when we have lots of different voices, lots of different people at the table helping to shape those policies.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think from the Citizens League perspective, we're a little bit unique in the nonprofit space where we really kind of focus on problem solving at the policy level and the how of policy making happens and who's involved. But we don't set out with a specific policy agenda or topic. So unlike a lot of nonprofits that have a priority issue, education, healthcare, you think things like that, we kind of have a freedom to respond to the needs of the day. And it's given us the opportunity to work on an enormous range of topics over the years. The Citizens League, back in the late 50s, so a few years after the founding, was well known as the organization that kind of put together the report that led to the creation of the Metropolitan Council, and over the years, many other things that we've had the opportunity to work in. But I think we really have that unique opportunity to say, what are the challenges that communities are facing right now? Who can we partner with, and who needs to be involved to make sure that policy outcome is the best?
And I seem to recall from reading about public policy history in Minnesota, we were very innovative. We were one of the first major metropolitan areas in the country to move toward the creation of a Metropolitan Council, which really didn't just have ideas of individual cities, but tried to get consensus from surrounding communities in the metro area about development issues, about what path we were going to follow.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you really think of that general idea, excuse me, there are so many elements of a metropolitan regional governance that are important, and it just wouldn't work as well. Think of things like wastewater and other things that the Metropolitan Council is in charge of. Having a patchwork of different cities across,
doesn't work.
It wouldn't work.
Right.
And so I think that was, some of the things that led to the creation of the Metropolitan Council. Of course, over the years, the Metropolitan Council has changed, and there are today many different opinions about how they should operate, whether they should be elected or not, and the legislature is actively engaged in that conversation. And even more recently, I think 2015 or 2016, I want to say, the Citizens League did another report kind of examining the Metropolitan Council, which was a piece of the conversation as lawmakers right now are, I think, considering that big question of do they shift the Metropolitan Council to an elected body or not? And there are certainly pros and cons to that conversation, but it is unique, I think, to have to be the organization that, when you really look back on the history, was a part of the creation of and that idea of having something like the Metropolitan Council to oversee the region.
Right. So when I was looking at the Citizens League website, I was interested to see that you describe your mission as taking a bipartisan, but even I saw the phrase a multi-partisan approach.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between bipartisan and multi-partisan approach to public policy?
I'd say that there is. Bipartisan, people often hear that and they assume Democrats and Republicans, right? But as we've seen and as we understand, few political issues are entirely black and white, and people fall all over a political spectrum, right? So whether you're a Democrat, whether you're an independent or a Republican or somewhere else, or you call yourself something else, I think what the Citizens League really tries to uphold is that idea that whomever you are, whatever your experience is, whatever your background is, wherever you might live, you have a role to play in policy making, and we want to make sure that we create those opportunities for folks to really get outside. I think today it's so easy to live in our political bubbles, right? Whether it's social media or the communities we're around, we often surround ourselves with people who think and act or maybe feel the same way as we do. But from a Citizens League perspective, the best public policy outcomes are when we engage diverse voices and bring a broad swath of people together to really hammer out those differences and challenge each other to think differently about topics that we might not have considered.
Related to that point, I want to read something that you said. The League's work is essential now more than ever when we find ourselves in a deeply polarized and divisive political environment. Public trust in government is near historic lows, and sadly, while most Americans agree on the core principle underlying American democracy, they no longer recognize that the other side also has those values. I want to dig a little deeper on that.
Yeah.
So what do you see, Jake, as core American democratic values?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think for me personally, that the core value that we really need to try and uphold, and that I think the Citizens League is so committed to, is a basic understanding of conversation and understanding another person's point of view, right? We live in a democracy. We live in a fascinatingly diverse country that has people from all corners of the globe represented here. And in Minnesota too, we have an increasingly diverse population in the state of Minnesota. And how do we really take all of those lived experiences and put them together to have the best policy outcomes? I think we do see ourselves in a polarized society. Everybody can feel it. It's 2024. Polls show us that many people are not excited about the upcoming election, and we tend to revert back to our camps where people are more comfortable or people feel and think like us. But I think we really see our job at the Citizens League as challenging that and saying, well, wait a minute, what aren't you understanding? Who isn't at the table? What can you learn from somebody else? And how can we pull that together to make sure that the policy outcomes, the things that we're changing or modifying at the state legislature, serve as many people as possible?
When we talk about shared values, shared democratic values, I think of things like free and fair elections, elections where we don't create impediments to people registering to vote or exercising their franchise, creating legislative districts that do not dilute the power of particular communities because we don't like their political predisposition. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That's a huge part of it.
But it would seem to me too, when we say that a lot of our fellow Americans, they don't share that view. That we have legislatures moving to restrict the right to vote. We have them even trying to, I believe it was in Texas, trying to criminalize giving somebody a bottle of water who's standing in line to vote at a polling place.
Wow. Yeah.
So, it does make you wonder sometimes whether enough of our fellow citizens do appreciate those common democratic values.
It's tough, and I think we find ourselves in a really challenging time politically, and I put a lot of that responsibility on our political leaders themselves, on both sides of the aisle, because people are going to disagree about who's more at fault, but I really try and take that up to that 30,000-foot view and say, look, we elect people to represent us, and the choices that they make are directly impacting all of us, and they set the stage for what kind of country and what kind of conversation we have. So do we want to retreat, and do we want to make it into a war of us versus them, black and white, always this or that, or do we want to try and approach politics from a broader sense and say, look, there's going to be a lot of different perspectives, and it's our duty and our responsibility as elected officials, as community leaders, as people in positions of power to really try and represent as many people as possible and do the work of actually, I think, going out in a community and listening to people who we know disagree with us.
You and I share something in common. We both worked for elected officials. You worked for Republican elected officials. I worked for a Democratic member of Congress, the late Bruce Vento, who represented St. Paul in the 4th Congressional District. And I remember something that Bruce told me that I've never forgotten all the years. He said, remember, never forget, we represent not just the people who voted for us, but for the people who didn't vote for us. And you owe them your respect. You owe them your ear. You have to listen to what their concerns are. And it may not mean that at the end of the day we're going to be able to vote the way they want us to, but they deserve an explanation. We need to be accountable to our constituents for how we vote.
Absolutely.
And so to some extent too, I think you're right that the politicians are shaping the tone of politics in our country, but to some extent voters bear responsibility too if they're going to vote for and elect people who are extremely divisive and who don't want to compromise.
Right, and I think that's where we see so much of a unique aspect for the Citizens League to be involved, right? To encourage people to try and step out. It's real easy to fall into those camps where everybody agrees like us and thinks like us, and after every election you can...
It becomes an echo chamber.
It does, but that is, I think, a big root of the problem, right? When we're only talking to the echo chamber, it becomes almost impossible to understand how anybody could think differently, when in reality, half the country probably feels differently or has a different perspective. And to me, if you're in a position of power, if you're a political leader or you're an elected official or not, you're a community leader or you're just an average voter, doing that work of understanding another person's perspective, where they're coming from and why they have the deeply held belief they have, because I think that's also core to this, is sometimes when you work in sort of this approach of bipartisanship or multi-partisanship and trying to hold up all those voices at the same time, we often can hear a criticism that, well, you're just trying to kind of go to the mushy middle, right? You're to make everybody compromise, and it's actually the opposite. I want to hear your strongly held beliefs, and I want you to be open to the strongly held beliefs of another person. But that requires a willingness to listen, and I think that's where the Citizens League tries to elevate voices and leaders and people who are doing just that.
And I think it's an uphill struggle in the sense that it's not just our political debates that have become polarized and fractured, but you see it in social media, the rise of social media where, you know, it doesn't reward reason and rational conversation and civil conversation or civil disagreement with each other. It rewards bombast and outrageousness and saying the most absurd things. And, you know, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York, who I had the pleasure of knowing when I worked in Washington, he was fond of saying, he said, you know, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts. And unfortunately, we live in a time where people have different set of facts that, you know, they may say something and it just isn't so. And it becomes very difficult to achieve consensus in politics or public policy when people are living in different universes of reality.
It is tough. I think we find ourselves in a time period where facts and things that we always sort of assumed were true, and that we all, you know, the unspoken rules of politics or how things went, those are all being questioned, and that makes it really difficult to navigate because you have people who for many reasons might feel one way or the other when the facts don't always align with that. But how do we really create a space where we can tackle those challenges in a respectful way? Because I think you're right. Social media creates an incredible ability to connect with people quickly and deliver a message in faster than it's ever been done before in history. But it also rewards the most, I don't know, partisan, extreme, you know, very few things can be brought down to a nuanced 280 characters or not, right? Most political issues are more nuanced than that, but we lose a lot of that in social media, and I think that's a huge challenge.
Jake, let's talk about some of the Citizens League's recent or current activities, the way you implement your mission at the Citizens League. Tell us, what is Capital Pathways? What is this program that you have at the Citizens League?
Capital Pathways is one of the things that's really become a flagship program for us and something we're really proud of. It was created 9 years ago with a specific goal to make the state capitol and policymaking spaces generally more reflective of the diverse communities that we have in Minnesota. I was a lobbyist at the Capitol. I've seen it tends to be a predominantly white place where we've seen a lot of more increasing diversity with folks who are elected to represent their communities, but historically, state capitol and state government has been predominantly controlled by white Minnesotans, and I think that was really what one of the challenges that the Citizens League was trying to tackle. So Capital Pathways is a paid internship program specifically for college students who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. We currently are in the middle of our largest cohort yet, 40 students currently enrolled, and by the end of this year, more than about 300 students will be alumni of Capital Pathways.
So where are these internships? Where are you placing these young people? Are they with elected officials or with nonprofit organizations or with businesses? Where are they going to get this experience or exposure to public policy?
Kind of all of the above. So nonprofit organizations, businesses, advocacy organizations, all that have some involvement or are working at the Capitol. And throughout the 9 years of Capital Pathways, more than 90 organizations have partnered with us to host an intern, and many of them, many years over, have come back to continue being a part of the program. And it's just been such a rewarding experience to hear from these students. And
they're from all over Minnesota,
not
just the metro area.
When it started, it was mostly in the metro area, but this current cohort that we have now, expanding into greater Minnesota, has been a big goal for us, and really proud that this year 25% of the students attend colleges outside the Twin Cities. Creates more challenges because it's not always easy for them to get to the Capitol as it is with others who are closer, but I think those are challenges that we want to continue to overcome and really find ways to continue to give those students, because what we see is a lot of these students tell us something along the lines of they just never saw anyone who looked like them or never saw a pathway for them to be involved in policymaking. One of the alumni students is actually our Citizens League board vice chair now, and I was just talking to her recently, and she said, I used to drive by the Capitol on 94 all the time, and to me it was just a big fancy building until I had an internship with Capital Pathways learned what it was like, and now she runs her own lobbying and advocacy firm at the Capitol as a Black-owned, woman-owned firm. And I think that type of impact, we have Capitol Pathway students who are now elected officials on city councils, who are working in DC, who are really making change and impacting their community. And it's because they started at the Capitol Pathways
That's really
program.
remarkable, opening new perspectives for young people who are going to consider careers in public policy or maybe elective office. Really something. And also making sure that the diversity of Minnesota is reflected in the halls where decisions are made, whether it's in the city hall or county government or at the state level or even at the federal level too.
Absolutely. I think it's really easy when you've always been in the majority to not feel like you're missing out on something, but when you really hear from some of these students about their experiences and what it means to see people who look like them and have similar life experiences as they do in those positions, that really changes perspective for young people, and we're so proud of Capitol Pathways. We have one of the original members of the very first cohort is also on our staff, and she runs the program now. And Kalia Zhang, she's fantastic. She does a great job, and all we want to do is continue growing the program because every year there's more and more interest.
Let's turn our attention to another program you have, Ed Talks, which short for Education Talks, I assume. Tell us about Ed Talks.
Well, I think that the name kind of describes it. Citizens League has long been known for events. We've had a lot of event series over the years, and Ed Talks is one of those. We don't have any current Ed Talks planned. We're working with some partners on other events, but it was really, and maybe in the future, specific to kind of educational discussions, right? What are those? We think about different policy topics that are really relevant and salient for different communities around the state and how education should look, what education should deliver, what reforms need to be made in our educational system. That's really what the idea of Ed Talks is all about. And Citizens League was another one of the foundational reports of the League in our early days was the development of charter schools. That also was a report that predecessors long before me worked on as a Citizens League report.
One of the issues that I think has continued to concern a lot of Minnesotans has been the differences, if you will, between perspectives of people who live in greater Minnesota versus the 2/3 of the state's population that lives in the Twin Cities metro. And there's sometimes a feeling, I think, of alienation on the part of people in rural Minnesota not really feeling fully a part of the state when decisions are being made down here in the Twin Cities metro. So the Citizens League has been involved in something called Interconnected Rural-Urban Conversations. Say a word about that.
I would love to. So Interconnected started in 2020. After the COVID pandemic put a lot of our events in person on hold, we really tried to find new ways to keep people engaged and have those conversations. And we've been so proud to partner with the Center for Rural Policy and Development on Interconnected, which is an event series specifically aimed at that problem you just talked about, helping folks who live in urban areas and rural areas understand each other's challenges, understand things that they're facing, and often shared opportunities. So more recently, a lot of that work has been to highlight some of the Center for Rural Policy Development's research. They do a lot of research papers, and we've talked about everything from childcare to healthcare and mental health and the really challenging suicide epidemic in greater Minnesota. But I think we're really excited to continue that partnership and so grateful to the center for a lot of the research that they're doing to really highlight and elevate some of these concerns in rural Minnesota.
I saw one of the issues that you were looking at too was the disparity in healthcare services. Much more difficult for people living in rural Minnesota to sometimes have access to local clinics, local hospitals. In fact, we've seen a number of rural hospitals closing. And I understand that Citizens League took a look at this, facing some of the challenges facing these rural areas and urban areas in terms of access to emergency medical services. Real important issue for people, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's another one of those areas where those of us who live in the Twin Cities and are used to having
take it for granted.
Clinic or care really close by, it's easy to take for granted. But to sort of step back and realize folks who live in rural Minnesota, and it's really important to understand that we often talk about greater Minnesota as this one body, but the challenges to folks who live on a tribal reservation in northern Minnesota or in southern Minnesota, they're different. And so we can't just clump greater Minnesota into one group of people.
Living, the challenges in White Earth County or in the White Earth Reservation Beltrami County are different than they are in Nobles County in southwestern Minnesota.
Absolutely. And I think helping everybody understand and be open to what really does that look like, and what does life look like? Why do folks choose to live in these communities? What do they need, and what services create more because there are challenges to living in rural communities, but there are also a lot of benefits, and a lot of people really want to live there. And what can the state do? What is our role to play to make sure that communities outside of the Twin Cities have the ability to thrive just like the rest of us?
Run, serve, lead. What it's like to serve in local elected office. Say something about the Citizens League's Run, Serve, Lead initiative.
That was one of the most recent reports that we did that my predecessor and our most recent policy director had a role in. And I think it really was looking at trying to better understand, because we've seen, as even statewide federal races, very polarized, very partisan. But over the more recent years, we've seen even school boards and local elected municipal races become more divisive. And honestly, less people running for office because of that. It becomes more challenging, and people just say,
I was going to ask you about that. It seems that local elected officials now are encountering some of the threats to their own personal safety that we've seen at state level and at the federal level. This goes right down to local elections officials who, that's the core element of our democracy. If we can't have people running the machinery of our democracy, which is free and fair elections, isn't that a danger to all of us?
Absolutely. And I think that was part of that report, was really trying to understand a few key questions. Why do people run for office? Why don't they run for office? Why do they choose not to continue? What motivated them to run in the first place, right? All of these questions to really get a sense, and we talked to a lot of local elected officials, but I think that's some work that we really hope to expand on a little bit. That was primarily Twin Cities folks who talked to us for that report, but I think understanding what are the challenges for people running for office in rural communities as well, that'll be a big question.
I think I saw on your website that there was some connection too between the willingness of people to run for local elected office, say city council or school board, if they had good connections through their social networks. That other people, that became a big factor in encouraging them to make the jump and to run for office.
That's one of the things that we heard from a lot of people, and that's really, I think that connects a lot to Capital Pathways, that social capital, right? Having people who trust you, who are encouraging you to run for office, who are supporting you. I mean, think if you're somebody who moves to a new community and you don't really have a lot of network or a lot of social capital, you don't know a lot of people, the idea of running for office to represent your community would be really challenging. And what we heard from a lot of people, particularly women who are elected, is that they often need to hear from people many times before they actually get up the courage to run for office. And then unfortunately, a lot of times they don't want to stay because we've created an environment societally, politically, that makes it really challenging to serve your community. And that's not good for any of us.
I did an interview earlier this year with one of our state legislators, State Senator Jim Carlson, who represents Egan. And he made a comment that really I was struck by, that they have the highest representation of people of color in the Minnesota legislature right now than in our state's history. And it sort of reflects the changing demographics of Minnesota. The president of the Senate is African-American Minnesotan. So there are these opportunities for people out there, but again, there are impediments to people running for office too, cost and different challenges, putting together a campaign, running a campaign. It's a lot of work.
It's a full-time job. I mean, it takes a lot to run for office. And so really kind of understanding, what do people need? How can we make it easier? And how can we really support people? And actually, lots of people are interested in positively impacting their community, being a part of change. They have something that they care about, that they're passionate about, that they want to be a part of. How can we make it easier for people to do that, and not have them get so discouraged by the process that they just give up? We don't want people to give up on our system. We need people who care to get involved, and I think that's become more and more a challenge.
Jake Loesch, Executive Director of the Citizens League, thank you for coming on Access to Democracy today. Have appreciated your insights, and I hope we can have you back on the show again sometime.
I'd love that. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.